I'll keep my introduction super short. This is the second time I'm hosting a coffee chat. Last time I was in time, that was great. But this is kind of a follow-up of what I discussed last time, and it was about behavioral change, organizational change, and so on. And that's really my passion. I come from that field. And yeah, in my role as a senior journey management coach at TheyDo, that's essentially what I'm trying to do, really helping our customers take that next step with journey management, wherever they are in their maturity. So this is less about the platform. You won't see any TheyDo screenshots. It's more about how we can actually have change happen in our platform, outside of our platform effectively. So, as Charlotte said, this coffee chat is all about making the next step. And I wonder if there are people here in the room that might have this experience where they've tried journey management a little bit. They have mapped some journeys. They have maybe mapped a journey and created a pilot around it, but it felt kind of impossible to scale. So if you're wondering how to make that next step with journey management and to get it truly embedded in your organization, this session is really for you. So at the end of the session, you will know more about how to understand the organization as a wider system, how to influence that system, and also make sure that you can go from these isolated little wins to a more build out capability in your organization. So let me start with a bit of a pattern that I'm seeing repeatedly across the organizations I work with. You start small with one pilot, one journey, one micro journey. You get people involved, research, maybe some product managers, marketing, and so on. And you get to a really, effective output. You have improved metrics. You are able to show them across the organization. You celebrate, and you launch another pilot. And that gets repeated and repeated and repeated. Well, this is what we call kind of the pilot trap. And while these pilots are very helpful to introduce journey management to the organization, they're also creating some hidden costs, because what we're essentially doing with the pilot is that we are bypassing existing processes. So instead of having product marketing and all these other departments involved in prioritization, we just ask our friends at product or marketing to do something for us and to make it happen for us quickly, because we want to show results fast. So it's really about, these journey owners that have a good relationships in the organization, that have a network, that can find friends that want to do something for them. But at the end of the day, we're kind of burning out these change champions, and they feel unsupported, and leadership is not stepping up for them. And they feel like, yeah, am I actually willing and ready to do another journey pilot? So what we believe and what we've seen within TheyDo is that moving forward and making the next step with journey management is really about understanding the organization as a system, and not just proving that journey work can be relevant in small little teams. So let me, go internal here and explain you a little bit about how I've seen this happen in one of the organizations I work with. So what happens if you keep betting on those journey pilots? So this is a airline story I want to share with you, and that's an industry that's very close to my heart. But I want to take you back to 2015, so 10 years ago already. Back then, this organization was a front runner in journey work. And this airline, it's an airline in Europe, and they're actually a little bit under pressure, because they're seeing a lot of low-cost carriers coming into the market, and they have to improve their revenue. And they're looking to improve the booking journey. So I book a ticket, I book a flight. And they're looking at that journey in isolation. So they're looking at conversion rates, pricing, offers, competition, and so on. And this is a classic journey setup, I'd say. It's a cross-functional team that is working on the booking journey, but cross-functional in the silo. So we have revenue management joining, we have digital joining, we have pricing joining, and so on. But what happens? This cross-functional team is thinking about how can we increase our revenue, how can we increase conversion, and they have this magnificent idea. They think, and what they want to do is they want to unbundle bags from the offering. So back in the days, maybe people still remember that whenever you booked a flight, you would also get a bag for the same cost. Very convenient. Currently, we all know that's not the case anymore. And back then, this was actually initiated by this airline because they thought, well, people that don't need a bag, they'll book without, and people that will need a bag, they'll just book a bag. And that's actually very great for, our conversion and our airline revenue and so on. So actually, this was a very, very successful pilot because booking conversion improved immediately. Revenue was coming in. People were happy. It was just one good show. And what happens in large organizations, if you do well, you get promoted. So everyone was promoted. They did great and so on. But then the chaos happened because what happened was that customers actually started to put everything they had in their hand luggage. And I'm guilty to this as well. Instead of paying that $50, I'm like, yeah, let's just put it in my hand luggage and make sure that it fits in that overhead bin. But unfortunately, that caused a lot of problems. So gate agents, they were overwhelmed. Flights were delayed because the hand luggage simply didn't fit anymore. Staff was demotivated. Customers were frustrated. And at the end of the day, this airline had to buy new planes with larger hand luggage bins to make sure that people actually could take their hand luggage with them. So the full business case that was presented in the iBook Flight Journey was actually evaporated in operational costs. So what was the reason why this wasn't thought through well? Well, I get it, because creating such a new offering, there are already 80 people involved to get this across. And this team thought, well, I'm not going to invite every single person of this airline to this pilot. So operational teams weren't involved. There was no one who actually thought about the end-to-end conversation, didn't think about how customers potentially would change their behavior. And there was simply put no cross-functional, cross-journey impact assessments. So even though they wanted to do good and they were thinking from a customer perspective, from the booking journey, they weren't really thinking across the full organization. And the reason for that was that there was no organizational infrastructure in place. There was no way that they could easily talk to these different operational departments. And there was just no rhythm, no workflow, no shared prioritization system. There was just a lot of things missing. Now, I'm curious. These coffee chats always are a bit interactive, and I know that I came late today, so I'm so sorry for that. Hopefully you're all still here and want to work with me. But I wanted to pause for a moment to have you think about your own examples. Maybe some of you are currently working on a journey pilot and they would like to take the next step, but they are kind of, blocked by it or not knowing what next step to take. So is there anyone who would like to share some experiences with this? No pressure, there's no right or wrong. These coffee chats really flourish because of different perspectives. So let me pause and see if there's someone who recognizes this and wants to share their story. Anyone? All right. It seems we have a bit of a shy group, but Ron, thank you so much for helping me here.
Sure, I'll bite. So we've done this. We started with some small journey pilots that were impactful to those teams, and they saw the value in it. It lacked a little bit of maybe the broader organizational visibility and things like that. So that held some of that back. We've actually done a few small pilots like that. So then it's kind of like building up the pebbles to, to build a step.
Thank you so much for sharing. And how have these pilots been? Have they been successful? Were people buying in? Did they like it?
Yes. Like I said, I think they were successful to the teams, I think now we're looking for something with more organizational visibility to try to get more of the broader senior leadership buy-in. We do have the benefit that we now have an operating model that's starting to enable journey work, so that's helping us expedite. But yeah, so now we're moving into a pilot that's way more visible so that folks can see it. I think we needed the smaller pilot though too, to see how does this work? Does it work with the teams? Iron out some of the challenges and iterate on it a bit too. So I think we needed that. It's just now we have to become more visible and have a bigger show bigger value.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Ron. I see Erin raised her hand as well.
Yeah, this is excellent. Yeah, very relevant conversation. I have my own firm right now, and so I'm kind of in between roles, but I was formerly with JP Morgan Chase, and we would run successful journey map initiatives within kind of a siloed experience, and they were broadly celebrated at town halls. And the problem was that at scale, it was not effective to see joint priorities across the organization.
That's a fantastic point, Erin. And I think that's something that we're all struggling with. And to Ron's point, it really helps if there is visibility and we have a strategic pilot and there is more senior leadership involved and there is a way of working and operating model change. Those are really like the light bulbs that we have to focus on, because the harsh truth here is that as a single journey team, it's not going to fly. It's too hard. The organization is too big, and you need support and you need a coalition. So that's what we will be talking about today. So thank you so much for your input, and yeah, keep them coming, those examples. That's what we're here for. So there is this kind of threshold moment, right? As said, pilots are good. They're good for building credibility. They're good for showing how it works. It's also good for finding out how should the workflow be and how can we connect to one another and so on. But there is this kind of moment where incremental pilots must give way to the systemic change. And in my work with organizations, I can usually sense when they're approaching this threshold. It's often like change champions or journey owners kind of burning out and saying like, I can't do this again. So the challenge here is really to go from these isolated pilots to operationalizing it, and making sure that everyone in the system also understands what their responsibility is, and make sure that we respect the processes, respect the natural expertise, and going from these heroic efforts to more sustainable ways of working. And doing so, yeah, we don't have to rely as much on those personal relationships. I don't know if you recognize this as well, but coming from this world, I was always busy with, finding my friends at marketing, finding my friends at product, hoping for them to, based on our personal relationship, wanting to prioritize something that I found very important that was connected to journey work. And while that can work, but it's not very effective, because essentially you're not changing the system and you only have a few friends that you can ask, and at a certain point that is done. So it's really about scalable impact that can grow with the organizational maturity. So maybe, yeah, we spoke about this already. Are we working with pilots? Is there someone that feels that has reached that inflection point? Is there something that you think is challenging to go from pilot to that more sustainable and systematic impact? I see that Dave has also reacted. Dave, sorry to put you on the spot. Thank you so much for sharing in the chat, but you're saying nobody's really interested in the value in my company. So it seems you might not be at that inflection point yet, but could you talk to us a little bit about what you're experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, we're experiencing all the things that lead you to do this and have customer journeys and kind of resolve disparate systems and data feeds. Prioritization is a real problem across the board. We operate the flood warning service for Wales, so it's really critical for our customers to be able to take the information and do something with it to mitigate flood, and defend themselves, their livelihoods, and their properties. But in trying to bring all this data together to evidence change and to get kind of a first pass of prioritization, the things that TheyDo does, it's just no interest. It's really quite soul destroying to be trying to leverage something that can align you, and we just seem to fall back into silos and repeat history, if you like. So we're not near the inflection point yet. Far from it, I think.
Yeah, and I obviously there are certain factors at play that influence this, right? It's your company DNA, it's maybe the industry you work in, how important is change, how needed is change. All these things are impacting whether the organization is ready and whether they are willing to listen. But it might also be, Dave, that there are different stakeholders that you haven't thought of before that could be interesting to think about. And that's something we will touch upon in the following few minutes. So stick with us and hopefully you get some inspiration. So because let's dive now in this like missing piece, the systems perspective. We believe journey work needs system thinking, because at the end of the day, customer experience and journeys, they span multiple departments, they span multiple processes. And in order to make change, we have to understand who influences whom, who takes the decisions, and how can we be in the core and the forefront of that. And so systems thinking is extremely wide and super powerful, and by no means am I an expert, but I do know how we have used systems thinking for our customers and making it kind of practical. So for the sake of time today, I am going to focus on one practical model that I believe all of you could maybe even use tomorrow. So hopefully, Dave, this can help you also understand the big picture, and maybe it will unfold or it will show you stakeholders you haven't thought of before. So a little bit of theory here. So systems thinking is recognizing that everything is connected. And so also problems are not isolated. They're symptoms of larger patterns. And instead of asking, how do we fix this isolated problem, it's really about what is causing this. Focus your shift from individual events to underlying structures and relationships. And it has helped our customers to really go from more reactive to a more strategic conversation with the different stakeholders in the organization. And I've even had some examples where instead of being surprised with resistance, these teams were able to predict where change was going to be hard or easy. Now let's unpack this network map that I'm going to focus on today. We believe that's the best for journey work, as it reveals who you need to engage for change. And the network map also shows how people, teams, and decisions connect. It's really good for understanding how influence and power flows. It's not extremely complicated or complex, and it's maybe not the golden nugget you're looking for, but I do encourage you to go into this and understand, because often we are so focused on getting things done that we forget how the bigger system works. So when we think about a network map, what is it all about? So think about it as you making a map of your neighborhood. You can't like map the whole city at once, right? It's so complex. It gets overwhelming really fast. So you need kind of a starting point and boundaries. And the same goes for organizations. Those get, very complex very fast. But these network maps really focus on what matters most for your specific challenge. So when you start mapping a network, it's recommended to start with the first step, which is framing the system. Framing what is it that you're focused on, but also what is the boundary? So where do we stop? Where do we begin? So let's say, the limit here is everyone involved in product roadmap decisions. these boundaries really help you to focus on the actionable relationship. It can become very overwhelming, as said. So good boundaries are good to set. So let's say indeed everyone involved in a product decision, roadmap decision, or maybe all stakeholders who influence the team priorities. Then the next step is a focal point. So without a center of the map, it can become a bit overwhelming because there are so many players who needs to influence what and so on. So we really want to make sure that there is this focal point. So let's say roadmap prioritization is the focal point, or your team is a focal point because you want to know how your team can influence. Well, obviously, at a certain point, you want to identify the players. So we have the obvious stakeholders, people you want to do something. But you can also think bigger here. So what processes are there? What BI plannings do we have? What budget reviews? What quarterly meetings? What tools, what rituals do we have currently? And what approval gates are there to that actually drive behavior in these different players? Then last but not least is the lens that you want to select. If we look at all these players and this system, what do we want to know? What do we want to understand? Is it who actually can make decisions happen, or is it understanding communication lines? So who talks to who, or who shapes opinions and who changes minds? So it's good to start with power, because typically that's the most relevant for journey work. You really want to know who influences who and who can make a call. And then last but not least, you're going to draw these connections. Thicker lines often say stronger connections, and arrows show the direction of power. And to your point before, Dave, I think this can help to discover the person you thought makes the decisions often doesn't make the decisions, and how other influencers might be unexpected. So it's really about finding the pathways to change that you might not have considered in the first place. Let me give you an example, because this is a bit theoretical, but let me give you an example of how one customer of mine has created a network map, and how that has actually helped them make the shift from pilots to more systemic integration, and how this systems thinking helped in identifying the invisible system actually. So the focal point here is the design team. The design team was a team we were working with. It's actually an insurance company here in the United States. And the question was, how can this design team influence roadmap decisions? Because a bit of context, this design team has mapped out multiple journeys based on research, based on facts, with a cross-functional audience. Marketing was involved, product was involved. They loved it, but they kept saying yes to things, but nothing actually got implemented. So it was kind of like 6 months of going back and forth, meetings, but zero actual changes. So they thought about the system, like, so who now is involved in product and marketing roadmap decisions? Like, how can this be that we want these people, product managers, to do something, marketing managers to create something, and they were just not doing it? And they didn't got a good reply at first. So they tried to investigate. So they were so done with it after these months that they were trying to investigate. And they asked the question, who really defines that marketing roadmap? So these marketing managers, they all the time said, like, yeah, great plan. But yeah, it's not on our tactical roadmap. So the next question was, who actually sets that tactical roadmap? Well, it turned out, surprise, surprise, to be the CMO. And the same went for product managers. They said, yeah, I'd love to build it, but it's not on our roadmap. So next question was, who actually sets that roadmap? Well, that's done in a PI planning. So everyone who is familiar with Agile knows that that's kind of like a quarterly planning rhythm where work gets distributed. But yeah, who influences that PI planning? Well, it turned out not only the CPO, but it turned out that these budget discussions that were influenced by the CFO were deciding or defining how many teams were going to work on a certain brand, or how many teams were going to work on a specific touch point, and so on. So these budget decisions happened annually, and they decided actually how many teams were going to work on what. But then, last but not least, there was kind of a breakthrough. They found out that there was this HR team, a way of working team, that was actually very influential in defining what the PI planning was all about. They were very close to these different executives. And it turned out that there was already a project in place. And I think this connects well to what you said before, Ron, that there was actually already an operating model change that they were looking into. And this was really a strategic pivot to them, because instead of this design team continuously, pushing PMs, pushing marketing managers, they actually found out that the key unlock was in that HR way of working team. And they really found a partner in them, and they helped to host workshops and co-design how this system could work better together. So all of a sudden, this like weird stakeholder from the HR department, they became kind of like helpers instead of, targets of change. So 6 months of, yes, let's do it, but nothing happened, actually became a new way of working with quarterly process plannings, with dedicated time and budget for journey management systems. And all of a sudden, journey work wasn't competing with organizational priorities. It was really supporting them. So I'd say the action item here is to stop talking to the person that you think makes the decisions, but start talking to the person who influences the person who makes the decision. So how can we do that, and how can we make this more strategic? So I said this is kind of a bit of a simplified version of the system. But yeah, I think this can be a really interesting tool for all of us to understand how are decisions being taken, with what cadence, at what time, and how can I make sure to have a seat at the table. So mapping out such a overview is only the first step. And the second step is really to step outside of that comfort zone and dare to ask the questions. That's something I'm seeing over and over again. And I've seen it as well in my own behavior, is that pilots are kind of easy, right? You can stay in your team, you can run pilots quickly, you can show results, and it's way more uncomfortable and harder to ask, important people to sponsor organizational change. And I feel that there is this little bit of fear of rejection when talking to executives, because people get uncertain about, hey, I don't know everything yet, like how this specifically can work for everyone. If I get hard questions, I might not be able to answer them. But I think we should step away from this intimidation from the organizational complexity, and really shift the conversation from, hey, how can we do something easy, to how can we have journey management strengthen our capability, and become more customer centric. And then again, don't do it alone. Like as said, like if you're just one journey team, chances are you're not going to get influence and buy-in. You really need to build those coalitions. And if you can find a strategic partner in HR, or in ways of working, or in product, then that's the place where you want to be. And that's where you have to have your support from. And also, if you have mapped out that system, you kind of understand what is everyone's position, and what is enabling them, or what is hurting them. And what is the right language to use when engaging these people. So I'm going to ask a bit of a direct question. I'm from the Netherlands, so that's what we tend to do in Holland. Do you feel that there is some discomfort that you might be avoiding in journey work? And is there maybe a strategic conversation that you have been putting off, that you feel should actually be, your number one priority, but you felt a bit uncomfortable about? Is there anyone who wants to open up and share their experience? Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, this is not from my perspective, but I think one of the things that I'm finding from stakeholders and their reluctance to engage in journey work is that it might actually tell them we're not doing as well as we think we are. It's that perceived negative, or highlighting a negative feedback that you need to grow and change. But I think the conversations I've had are uncomfortable, because that's a really big fear. What if we're told we're not very good? I think that's why people really struggle.
Yeah. So it's confronting them with their own weaknesses, maybe being a mirror to them. Yeah. Ron, anything to add?
think to me, it's asking the question if we're really focusing on the right things. A lot of times, the conversations around opportunities and the work lacks the rigor of what insights support this, what data's behind that. Are we, when you're not thinking about the journey, is there even something else we're not even thinking about because we're so narrow focused? And I think it's uncomfortable to say, are these really the right things? Is this really the biggest value, when a lot of stakeholders feel like, yes, I'm convinced it is based on my own assumptions.
Yeah. Also, I feel like sometimes what we get in return when we ask large, like important leaders to ask, like, hey, can we change the process? Can we work differently? Often we are also being met with these questions, right? Like, how do you know this is the most important? You get these into this very complex data discussions. Yeah, you didn't ask enough people. How do we know this is, for everyone, the most important element to focus on? And sometimes I feel like that's also a response from leadership to just delay the decision to work differently. It's a way to pause the good work you're doing. But yeah, that's very essential. That people need to feel comfortable and trust that whatever we're going to suggest to do differently is actually stalled in data and evidence. But sometimes I see it's kind of a thing that deviates you from the work you're doing. I'm not sure if anyone recognizes that, but it's often met with resistance there. Anyway, I think as a next step, I feel like showing pilot success is still the way we start with journey management. Is really about showing how we can influence metrics, but then at a certain point there is a need to map the system and to humanize the system, understand how these different people collaborate with one another, and understand how workflows are. So what we also typically do whenever we have such a system in place and we understand who needs to play where, we also host a workshop and we ask them to map out their role in the bigger picture. And that's also one of the key findings we had with TheyDo, is that the moment we impose a different way of working, it's often met with resistance. That's how it works, right? Not invented here syndrome. You haven't thought about me. You don't know the challenges I'm going through, etc. But if you have them included in the redesign, if you have them participate in workshops and put their name on a sticky note basically, and think about what is the big picture and how would they like to collaborate and how are they currently collaborating, that is also really an impactful way to have them participate and build your coalition already to co-design that future, and by doing so also connect to the existing rhythms and make sure that this is not a one-day fly, but actually something that is strategic and sustainable moving forward. And so you don't need to do this all at once, but I do think even if you're running pilots and you're not there yet, having an understanding and knowing what your next step can be is super powerful. It's crucial to understand, if we now finish this pilot, what is next? Because then you can also combine that when presenting the successes of a pilot, saying hey, and now we acknowledge that these pilots have gone without official processes, that were reliant on personal relationships, and now this is how we suggest the next step can look like. So I encourage you to start doing this, to map out your system, to understand the influencer behind the one who is taking the decisions, and start to build your coalition in maybe the more unexpected places in your organization. And yeah, I agree, executive support is truly needed. So at the end of the day, we need leadership to buy in, but it helps if you have some influencers. Just going to one executive with your story is often not going to cut it. You need support from different influencers to get this over the line. So, any questions? Any things people would like to share? Maybe someone wants to share something about how to engage executives in this matter. Erin, would you like to share a little bit about your experience there?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I think that journey work, although we are, I'm certainly passionate about it. I think I've seen a lot of head nodding that yes, this will move the needle with the Net Promoter Score and establishing kind of a new and improved share of outstandings. But I see the opportunity is really more in less in talking about customer journey and that relationship building with the customer and really meeting them where they are. And there's a real shift in really speaking to business and the executives about the metrics involved. And the minute you shift from the journey, which is kind of our ballpark, to meeting the business partners where they are and using more metric language, I think that's the sweet spot.
Yeah. Speaking their language, totally. I also have an example of a customer that was interesting. He was working as this like one-man army in a plumbing company. Well, you can imagine, we spoke about culture and readiness for journey management. Well, you can imagine hardcore plumbing company, not very digital, very siloed, very traditional. And he actually didn't use the word journey once. He didn't even tell people about the methodology. He didn't even show journeys. He didn't use all these like jargony kind of things. And he just used journeys for his own strategic work to understand what projects should be kicked off to improve the customer experience. So I think that's also interesting, Erin. Like not everyone speaks journey, especially executives don't. And they couldn't care less about the journey most of the times. So it's also about having these smart conversations and explaining, how to make a difference and have people work together without overwhelming them in methodology that is just irrelevant to them. So that's an interesting one. Yeah. All right. Well, I know we have a few minutes left, but I assume everyone is as busy as as we all are, even though it's summer holiday. So I think it's time to just close this one off. Thank you so much for joining today, and feel free to always reach out to me on LinkedIn to talk more about this. Happy to have a quick call with you or to see how I can help you move forward. So let me know, and it was really nice to hear from you, to have your experiences. I think Charlotta is going to share the slides in the community chat. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Rosanne, huge thanks to you for hosting the session and sharing your knowledge on this super relevant and valuable topic for most of the people here. And of course, thank you to all of you who stayed with us today and for all the experiences and comments you brought to the session. So yeah, as Rosanne said, we will be sharing recording afterwards, and yeah, feel free to continue the conversation in the community. So that's it from us, and hope to see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.